This is Mark Mitchell, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about Chapter 6 in our book. The title of the chapter is Groups and Organizations, and you can already see from this first slide the content of the chapter that I just want to make a few comments about as you read along in the textbook. We're going to cover all the things you see here by the time we end this recording today. So let's get started. Alright, some questions to keep in mind here is when we think about large groups and small groups, that's certainly in the next few slides something we're going to look at and distinguish between. But how do I behave differently when we're in a small group as compared to a large group? Our first question here asks. We also want to consider, how we make even larger organizational groups manageable when they can, say, get to the hundreds or thousands or even more. And then, for example, finally here, what effect with current social changes have upon the structure of groups? So all good questions to examine, and hopefully we'll find some of those answers before we end today. All right, just a definition of a group. So people with similar norms, values, and expectations who interact regularly. And of course now, some other things to keep in mind is that all people who are together do not constitute a group. So for example, think of a college football game, and there could be up to 100,000 people in a stadium watching the game, but they don't really qualify as a group because they may have the norms, they may have the values, maybe even certain expectations are the same, but most of them do not interact even at all. And so that is more of a crowd or an aggregate or something like that, but it really would not be considered a group. All right, now on this slide, really two types of groups that we want to consider other than what I just mentioned, but the fact we have a primary group, and that is the one that is usually numerically smaller, but you do have all those things, including the interaction that was in our definition of a group. So the most important example of a primary group that I can think of would be something like a family or very close friends, relatives, something on that nature. And then a secondary group generally might be a little larger. I guess in some cases it may not be at all, but the relationships are changing. So think of people that you work with. Now they certainly can be close to you, but I would think on average most of the people do fall into a secondary group. Or think of if you've ever been on a committee or volunteered some time to a cause that you thought was worthy. Why are you there together? Well, you had a task, and once that task is complete or finished, then you move on to something else. The group disbands. So a lot of our political committees, for example, they will be active during a year, maybe 2 years of a presidential cycle, and then after that election, they shortly thereafter disband, or if the candidate's not doing well, even before the election. All right, so a couple examples there of two types of groups. A couple more here on this next slide. We have in-groups and out-groups, and really the difference between it is really, I think, kind of easy to remember. The in-groups are the esteemed group, the group that's held in positive regard, that we want to be a part of, that we look up to. Maybe we do want to change our values and beliefs a little bit to be accepted by this in-group, and our mannerisms, our dress, behavior, all that may change as well. And then out-groups are the one that you feel really the opposite towards, so maybe not wanting to be a part of, but the ones that we scorn, that are considered outcast, something along that line. So I guess if you can think back to your public school days, you could certainly think of groups that were really popular with not only students but teachers and parents, and just had a positive connection, versus out groups that got really the scorn of all that. Maybe even law officers, if you had any officers on campus while you were in high school. Makes you think of several movies that really show the difference of in-groups and out-groups. X-Men is a comic book movie, but the X-Men and women there are the out-group. They are the outcast of society, and And actually, regular people there are the in group. They're the ones that are seen positively, and then we have this other group, the X-Men, that are seen negatively because of their unique abilities. All right, so as the bottom part of the slide says, of course, we can have conflict between these two groups, and it can be over a variety of things that people value. All right, still with types of groups, and we have a reference group, and say you have a young person who wants to make a decision. They needed a group to run it by, so generally parents or a parent, maybe one in particular, serves as a reference group on how they get information to enforce their beliefs or their values. Also, with young people, as my example, their own friends serve as a reference group, and maybe over some of the lifestyle choices like dress and music preference and things of that nature, and maybe other things. But when it really comes to really important things, research has shown that young people in particular, if they have a good relationship with mom or dad, run things by them for that. All right, and then the bottom part of the slide, just one other thing to consider there is coalitions. Is sometimes groups will come together if they have a common goal in mind. So right along with our idea of a reference group. This slide right here just shows you really some characteristics of these two groups that we've been talking about, the overall idea of primary groups and secondary groups, and you can really see among this list that they really are opposites. So, with primary group being small, secondary group being large, and on and down the list, you can see what I'm talking about or referring to. All right. Just a couple definitions here relating to groups and really small groups at that. But dyad, you may already recognize that, but that's at least two people in a group. Now, you've got to have two to have a group. If you only have one, it's not considered a group. Now, a dyad is, of course, our two-member group, but another thing that's really important is these are the weakest groups, period. And why is it the weakest? Because there's only two, and if one moves away, one leaves the group, you don't even have a group anymore. Now, some of our most significant relationships in life happen to be based off a dyad. So, for example, your marriage partner, you and this person that you love, united together in marriage, you are a group as long as you are together. But say, your partner dies, unfortunately, or something else that happens that separates the two of you with no hope of reconciliation, then you are no longer a group. All right, so a triad is a three-member group, and it is stronger for exactly the same reason that I just mentioned before. You can have one person who leaves a three-member group or triad, and you still have a dyad left, so you actually still have a group. All right, so you may be thinking already, the more we have in our group, the better, and I guess that to some degree is true, but if you're trying to have a conversation, what research shows here is that when you get up to about 7 or so, then it really gets kind of hard unless special considerations are made to keep everybody kind of connected into the group. Really not much after that, you start seeing large groups of people break off into smaller groups, and I guess that type of interaction is easier and finds people's preferences there. However, if you are in a real large group like that, say in our classroom setting or something like that, and you want to get somebody's attention, then you just, no matter how many people there, you could say their name, and that's an automatic attention grabber, no matter if they're in another group or not. But we are conditioned to listen for our name, and so that's one way to kind of circumvent these rules. Okay, another idea here is groupthink, and really, I guess in groupthink, it seems to be more negative the way it's presented in our textbook by our author, because here it's really where people kind of agree to whoever's in charge, and that's exactly what our definition is indicating. Pressure to conform to whoever's in charge, the top person there, the big cheese, the head honcho. And so I remember reading about Saddam Hussein when he was alive, that he would have people in different government functions, and if he would ask for their ideas, and some people were brave enough to actually disagree. He would suggest something, and then well, what do you think about this idea? And somebody would be honest, so they would not be using groupthink in this situation, but they would say what they really thought. And reportedly Saddam would thank them for their opinion, and then later on they would be dismissed, and they would go into another room, and there was plastic paper on the floor, and then someone else would kill this individual, and of course that was the end of the story for them. So in that case, groupthink had a high cost, and so most of our everyday situations, like the slide shows, maybe it's related to our job or something like that, but not nearly based on survival. Most people tend to conform to pressure. They don't want to rock the boat and stand out. So I guess you need to be aware of your circumstances when you are going to express a diverse opinion. Now, you may here's an opposite idea to groupthink that's not mentioned in our book, but just to kind of help differentiate between the two, but called brainstorming. Now, brainstorming is where you come up with different ideas. There is no pressure to conform. It's simply to come up with as many ideas as possible. They're all good. Years ago in school, that was one of the things that they had mentioned to us. Just simply a creative brainstorming type process. So 180 degrees away from groupthink. All right, now we got a reference here on the slide to an article in our book in chapter 6, which I always encourage you to read everything, but they raise some good points there in this article, and that's in our book again. But doing mock trials, so researcher there, and they were basically looking for any significance to how juries were making their decisions. And what the article basically says is if the female rape victim was either drunk, then the offender was usually not prosecuted for the crime. So, what does that say about their reasoning, and who's responsible, the victim or the perpetrator? Now, many years before, when I was in school at East Carolina, I had a professor who was doing this type of research that we're reading about right here, and they actually found something a little bit different, but really not a whole lot different than what our book is reporting. But they would have, for example, and it was always a female victim and a male perpetrator, and that's really how rape mostly occurs. 98 to 99% follow that pattern. It's definitely, generally speaking, a male on female or a male on male crime. All right, so we're sticking with that. But anyway, they found that if it was a good-looking man and there was a female rape victim, he was more likely to get off than an ugly male perpetrator. And I guess the jury's thinking was something like this, is that, hey, if you're a good-looking man, you don't need to go around raping women. You're going to have lots of women who are interested in you freely, and you're not going to have to force them against their will. However, if you are ugly, not a good-looking fellow, then you are going to have to maybe force some women into a sexual relationship that they would prefer not to have. So that, if that is true from their research there, if that's actually what they were thinking, that's a very interesting thought. Not saying I agree with it, but it's kind of some strange reasoning there that makes you wonder what's going on. Now, also, there with the research that was going on, they also found kind of something opposite. But if it was with an unattractive female, then that also casts doubt on whether the male perpetrator would actually try to rape her. So that was some research that, again, one of my professors had done, and those were the results that he was able to share with us. So that was also something I wanted to share with you. All right, moving on again. Here on our next slide, we see a little bit change of topics, but formal organization and bureaucracies. Now, just keep in mind here, since we are talking about groups, we talked about primary and secondary already, and that's been a lot of our focus so far. Well, formal organizations and bureaucracies are more like the secondary group, so that's a real good connection to remember. as we are making some comments and about this right now. All right, so the main purpose of a formal organization is really to get things done, to be efficient in what you do. And they've been around for thousands of years, and simply because of trying to get things done. So we could, I guess, maybe argue in some of the efficiency when it comes to government and also as well as business. But I think, as our chapter has already mentioned, McDonald's is a good example of a formal organization there that performs one main task, and that is to serve food fast, efficiently, and at a reasonable price there and tasty to consumers who are coming to McDonald's. All right, so here we go. We're going to start looking now at some of the characteristics of a bureaucracy. One of our sociological or one of our famous sociologists that we might want to associate with this type of research is Weber, who's mentioned here on this slide as well. But the bureaucracy there is, we're going to look at several of the characteristics, but again, it is a large secondary group really that is involved in a hierarchy from top level managers on down to the bottom, and all in the goal or sake of being efficient and performing tasks in an efficient manner. All right, our next slide does list the characteristics, and then the succeeding ones actually take them one by one and describe them a little bit better. So here we go. We got all 5 listed here, from a division of labor, the hierarchy I mentioned just a minute ago, written rules and regulations. That's a big one. Impersonality, so the faceless, nameless type thing, and really doesn't treat people individually, but just as another name or number in line. Is really what impersonality is trying to get across. And then the fifth one, last one here, is employment based on qualifications. All right, so a little bit more explanation of each of these follows. Division of labor, not so much by gender, but it just shows that in an organization, for example, everybody has their own thing to do. So take the college, for example. There's people who work in the registrar, there's people who work in administration, there's people who are staff, there's people who are faculty, and on and on and on. That's the division of labor that we see in a bureaucracy. So you can think of an automated plant or a hospital and do the same thing that I've done with my example for here on the college. All right, so now it's not all a happy story. We've got some problems here that are popping up. So alienation is one. And that is really, when you talk about labor, it should not be doing things of that nature, but sometimes this does. Now, Karl Marx would come in and say, well, I told you so. When you have private enterprise and you have the pursuit of profit, this is exactly what's going to happen with the division of labor. Now, that's his idea about what would happen. All right, and our book also mentions the trained incapacity. So you have someone, again, who's really doing one thing or a few things all the time, and they become so accustomed to that really everything else is blanked out. All right, more characteristics, hierarchy of authority. So think of a pyramid, and put some steps in that pyramid, and there's your hierarchy there from the CEO or the president of Johnston Community College and on down till we get there to the bottom rung. All right, written rules and regulations, but a policy really manual on how we do things as an organization. So, banks or colleges or what have you there is all good examples of places on this is how we're going to handle this task this way. All right, so maybe there is in the government maybe just such a dependency on having these written rules and regulations that there's no way that we ever do anything beyond that, and we just, this is the way we do it, and we've got it written down. All right, impersonality. This picture on the slide, I guess, does a good job of showing that, of just faces in a crowd with no real human connection or affinity towards one another, not even considering special cases or anything like that. That's it's just the way we handle it. I was taking a class one time, and it turned out I had a bone tumor that could have been fatal. But anyway, where I was going to school, they actually would not refund my tuition because, not of circumstances, but because of the date in which it happened. So that's maybe a good example of them personality. All right, here we have employment based on technical qualifications, and so you're promoted up to your ability to accomplish a goal or task. And we have a very interesting additional topic here, the Peter Principle, which says people are basically promoted to the level at which they can't be promoted anymore. And they base that off the idea that, well, you've reached your maximum level of competence of what you can do. You can't really handle anything over that, and so thus, your promotion is over. So this is a term that's pretty old, over 40 years old, but the Peter Principle, you're basically promoted to your top level of confidence and then no more. There's also another idea, I guess, that we can mention here as well, but work tends to expand to the time allotted for it. So that's another common little principle that's usually, when you see the Peter Principle, you'll see this other one. But if you give somebody 3 hours to do a task, and it's really a 1 hour task, they're going to take the 3 hours. All right, just as we had before, here's another slide that kind of sums up everything we've been talking about. In this scenario, it is the characteristics of a bureaucracy. And so they've actually thrown in some positive and negative consequences there as well. All right, just for review, really. All right, and here we go, some more with bureaucracy. But we see the bureaucratization, and that is this process by which an organization, a company, whatever you want to call it, they become more bureaucratic all the time. So they're going to incorporate all these characteristics in what they do, whereas they may have not done that before. We've been talking about a bureaucracy in terms of, like McDonald's is a very large corporation. Well, this even takes place, this process, even within small group settings. So that's the point our author is making right now. And then an oligarchy is the rule by a few. So think of the U.S. government. We have the Senate, which has 100 members. We have the House of Representatives, which also has, I think it's about 335 members. So all total, we have 435 people who really make the laws for the land. And then, of course, the president has say-so in that as well, can either sign it into law or veto it. But really, 435 people make decisions for over 330 million people. And just that is, the definition of an oligarchy, the rule by a few. All right, and we even have a further comment here, but the iron law of oligarchy, and it's really the same as what we saw previously on this slide, but even those organizations that seem to be democratic will develop into where only a few call the shots. All right, now we also have classical theory or scientific management theory or approach. And it's simply the idea that people are motivated by economic or monetary rewards, and so you should set up some type of scenario or a pattern where they are rewarded in this way in order to get the level of work that you desire. So I know with Frederick Taylor and Henry Ford, in terms of the auto manufacturing process, they were a couple individuals who tried to do things like this, and they wanted to really watch workers, find out where they could cut out wasted motion so that, they just took advantage of everything that they could. All right, so generally speaking, that's probably, if you can find what people want, then and you can reward them with these things, then they will be motivated. But the key is finding what they want. So I think right now, with the economic problems in our nation for the last several years, financial rewards should be very valuable right now, or able to motivate lots of people. Okay, and then the human relations approach there is simply what it mentions is the participation there within a bureaucracy that's emphasized regarding the people and communication that you find within. So there's a formal way to do this. That is our written rules and regulations. And then there's an informal way to do this, and that's like hearing it through the grapevine and gossip and things like that among workers. All right, so here's a tie back to McDonald's. Often, I think that's done because you can read about the McDonaldization of society, and it's how a lot of the things that we see in McDonald's to make it operate faster and smoother have also been applied to society in general. All right, so think about McDonald's, whether you like them or not. What are some of the things that you do like or don't like? How would you change them? Can you see anything kind of at McDonald's that's been incorporated into society at large? So, just getting people in and out of the store as fast as you can. Think about how easy it is really to buy something, but how difficult it is to return it. Why is it like that? This has been thought out there by people to kind of dissuade you from returning things sometimes. Now, and I'm sure many of you have probably seen Super Size Me, but that is kind of a little different than what our slide's talking about right now. But it does show some interesting things about McDonald's, some interesting comments about McDonald's, and how maybe the role that they play in the health of Americans. Now, there is a critique to that. It's called Fathead, but that is also very interesting, whereas Super Size Me points the finger at McDonald's. Fathead really says, well, wait a minute, let's just think about that. And maybe one other here that I could suggest to you if you ever get a chance is hot coffee. And I'll bring that up a few minutes later from now. There's another slide that I think that works best. But I did want to, since I threw out those two, just that one as well. All right, so, organizations are restructuring. That's something that we see throughout time and throughout the different eras that we have. And so things have been changing in our lifetimes, just like we read, for example, from animal to machine power and the Industrial Revolution and changes on that level. So we do see, for example, teamwork or collective decision-making. Now that our book mentions the late 20th century, so in the 1990s that was really popular there, especially in Japan, and tried to make its way over to the United States. Minimal hierarchy, maybe taking some of those levels out of our pyramid. Project teams and task forces, as well as collective decision-making, is to prevent the alienation, the dehumanization, and making work more satisfying to people, and that their input matters. All right, and doing it in-house versus out-house, that's the next comment there on our slide. And then, of course, more communication. So most of those do deal with just making people feel like they're appreciated at work, it seems like. All right, so the postmodern job involves telecommuters and traveling to work. Well, that's me, and I know a lot of my other colleagues here at the college are in that very same position. I know also that the college has quite a few people who teach that are in different states in the country. So not even telecommuters, but they do it electronically. So that's another aspect of the postmodern job on our next slide that is mentioned. So I was a little bit ahead there, but still you got the point. All right, so email is great when it works, and certainly speeds up the process, and instant messaging, and any other way that I'm probably behind on this a little bit, but I'm sure some of the younger people in class could probably teach me quite a few things on apps or other ways to communicate. And of course we have Facebook and MySpace and all those things that make it a whole lot easier. Now at the bottom of the slide they do mention there to fragmentation of work. So as compared to a 9-to-5 job, once you leave, that's it. But now with these different electronic means, you can really do you ever get away from work? You can always check your email or something like that, regardless of whether you're in the office or not. All right, so here's some pro and cons, kind of a summary here of the telecommuting and the electronic communication here. So there's one that I meant earlier under the cons. It's the second one, at home, right there. Means still at work. So you have to find a time when enough is enough, and you'll pick up the rest tomorrow. So I've had that struggle myself. All right, now the last, or one of the last ideas is talking about unions, and what they basically tell us in the United States is membership was higher in the past, and that makes sense because there wasn't a lot of worker rights, and people really suffered. There was no health insurance, there was no pension, there was no retirement. Often, if you got hurt on the job, you just, if you couldn't keep up, that was it. So if you've ever taken the Psychology 150, the Intro Psychology course with the JCC or somewhere else, you probably remember Phineas Gage. But he was a worker there. He was working in a mine and didn't get out in time when they were blowing it out. And about a 6-foot long and 13.5-pound iron rod was sent hurtling through the air, and it found its resting place in his skull. So it had a entry and exit wound into Mr. Gage's skull. Didn't kill him, but it really changed his personality, and he didn't get any settlement money that I'm aware of, but he did lose his job because he was, just a really good employee before, and because his personality was changed, he became a really bad employee, and so it was, a Jekyll and Hyde case, and they fired him. So and I'm sure that, there are many, many horror stories like that. But now, today, the union membership is down to a fraction of what it used to be. So, unions have helped in some regards, but maybe the abuses that they have helped to correct are no longer, at least in the United States, seen as to where people are really joining unions at a heavy, heavy rate. Now, worldwide, this is not true. We've got a graph in our book that shows us that, in some places of the world, I think Sweden was the top one according to our graph, but, nearly 70% of people are members of unions there in Sweden, and it really hasn't changed much over 40 and 50 years. Now, a couple of things to consider about that is, number one, Sweden has a very, very high tax rate. Now you do get some benefits to that. So, and if you lose your job or you get sick, you really don't have to worry so much about not getting paid. You can get paid up to about like 4 years, about 75% of your salary. Your health care, you've really paid for it, kind of prepaid for it with your taxes. A lot of things that families do there, the government steps in. So Sweden has also been called the place for the weakest families on earth, and that's because where families stepped in, now the government actually stepped in. So, with some of these programs to provide financial substance. All right, but the point there, I guess, is, how much socialism do you want? Would you give up some of your freedom if you had a safety net like that? So that may be an attractive option to some and maybe not so much to others. All right, so here's some more about the unions here, looking at the issue there. Do look at the chart in our book, and you can see how the United States is near the bottom. There's not many countries listed there, but and think about why that might be. And got a few suggestions here. So changes in the industry, part-time jobs, where the labor unions probably not nearly as effective there as compared to for the full-time workers there. All right, so now when we think of sociology as applied to unions, Marx would say, these are necessary because the employers there, they're going to treat the employees like spokes in a wheel, or that's his thinking, or Marx's thinking anyway, and so we do need kind of a check and balance system for the little guy, the worker there. All right. And, of course, coming back to the United States there, With Walmart, they will not unionize. That's something that if they're going to build a new store, it's going to be union free. So that's going right along with the slide here that the U.S. doesn't have nearly as much unions there as some of the European nations that are mentioned in our book, and of course how that plays out into elections, there in Europe and also here in the United States. That's something to consider. Now, I mentioned that other video. I want to bring that in here because this slide reminded me of it as well. But that video again was hot coffee, and one of the things that really talks about, there's 4 separate cases, but the main title of the video comes from a lady who was burned with the hot coffee at McDonald's and all that. You've probably heard about that before and how ridiculous it was perceived to be. But if you watch that video, that might change your perspective a little bit because McDonald's had about 700 to 800 complaints before that on hot coffee and just little old lady. And the other significant thing was she got, I think it was a $2 million judgment if I remember right, but where she lived there was tort reform, and so by law that was reduced down to I think 20% of what she actually won. So the bigger issue is, should a corporation be able to take away your right to resolve a dispute in court? Now McDonald's didn't do that in this case, but for example with your cell phones, with your bank account, they do. Basically, if you don't read those inserts, they basically say, if we ever have a dispute with you, we're going to settle it not in court, but through mediation. And you might say, well, hey, I never signed anything like that. Well, companies have gotten creative in that, say for a bank account, if you use your bank card after such and such a date, then you agree to that policy. Or, same thing with your cell phone. You agree to settle with a mediator instead of going to court if you use your cell phone after such and such date. Then that constitutes your acceptance of the agreement, and you cannot go to court. So that's also something that I guess really should not, in my opinion, should not happen. You should have your day in court if you so choose to do so. All right, and there's the slide there that talks about the union membership there. It's also in our textbook. But as you can see, the United States is near the bottom, but we don't have really a whole lot of data there. But it does show us there from roughly about a 40-year period. Okay, we have reached the end here, Chapter 6, about groups and organizations. And I hope this has been helpful to you as you read along. And thank you for your time, and I will talk to you again soon.